I am the president of the Women's Democratic Club of Montgomery County. WDC is a large and active club of over 600 women and men, including many elected officials. Our core mission is to elect Democrats and enact democratic policies. We do this by keeping members informed and facilitating on-ramps for activity and engagement. We urge you to become a member if you're not already, and to use our website and calendar to find events and opportunities that work for you and your schedule to actively help retake our democracy. Before we get to today's speaker, I have a few announcements, then I will hand it over to WDC board member Lisa Henderson. Lisa is the chair of our brand new task force on racial equity and public safety, and she will introduce our featured guest, Deray Mckesson, and moderate the Q&A. Then at the end of the program, we'll have a few slides of resources, including some books, videos, and podcasts that WDC has collected for our mutual education. At any point, you can submit questions using the chat box at the bottom, and please be sure to direct your questions to the one labeled WDC Q&A. Lisa will try to get through as many questions as we can. Okay, a few announcements, please. The main one is we need you. WDC, along with its sister organizations like Do the Most Good, MoCo Women, and Maryland Women for Biden, is leading on several fronts. In addition to the traditional work of voter outreach like phone banking and letter writing, we're cross-promoting meet and greets for candidates in swing districts. Because Maryland is solidly blue and our primary is behind us, we are now an export state, working with swing state candidates up and down the ballot who are running for the flippable seats that can give us back control of our state houses, our Congress, our Senate, and our White House. There are opportunities to do this literally every day of the week through WDC and our partner organizations who are listed on our website. I would like to specifically mention the Tuesday letter writing that is hosted from 5 to 6 p.m. by Lisa Fuller, who is the co-founder of MoCo Women, as well as a WDC member. And I'm her co-host on that Tuesday letter writing. There's also a Monday dessert party at 7:30 p.m., a Wednesday phone bank from 7 to 8:30 with Maryland Women for Biden, and others that are all linked to our website. This work is part of how we get the change we want and how we elect and advocate it. If you're already busy doing this work, thank you. And now think about who else you can bring in from your network. We also need your help with WDC committees, and those are listed on our website, whether it's working on our website, issue advocacy with state legislators, membership and outreach work, helping identify speakers, or with our new task force on racial equity in public safety, or working to repeal our racist state song. There are lots of options to help you get engaged. Our website also has a growing list of resources, books, podcasts, and videos to get yourself informed about this moment in our country and the realities that got us here. Resources also like the ACLU's Know Your Rights While Filming Police. And finally, please save Tuesday, July 21st at noon to hear from Kristen Clark, the Executive Director of Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Registration is open on our website for that event. If you've missed any of our previous events, there are YouTube links also on our website. So take a look at the website, let us know if you have suggestions, and above all, volunteer. So I think that's it for announcements from me. Let's get into our program, and I will meet you back on the other side. Here is Lisa Henderson, chair of the new task force on racial equity in public safety. Lisa? You're still muted. You're still muted.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lisa Henderson. Thank you, Diana. I am Lisa Henderson, the co-chair of the WDC Partnership and Outreach Committee and the newly formed Racial Equity and Public Safety Task Force. I met Deray Mckesson in these crazy times through an early morning text message. And those of you who've texted with me before know that the text message was kind of lengthy. And he immediately said, I said I need, and he said where. And he has shown up every time since, which we really appreciate. As you probably know, WDC is working to get all agencies with arrest powers in Montgomery County to adopt 8 policies immediately that have been proven to save lives. Adopting these policies is not a cure-all for police brutality and remedy racial disparities, in criminal justice and in our society at large, but they are a good start. Today's speaker is the man behind those 8 policies, known as #8can'twait. He's also an internationally known leader in the Black Lives Matter movement and has perhaps the most comprehensive data on police reforms that work. In 2015, while a human resource official in the Minneapolis public schools, Deray Mckesson watched the unrest evolving in Ferguson, Missouri, and he knew he had to be part of the work for change. For 400 days, he, along with many others, stayed in the streets of Ferguson because they knew that Michael Brown should still be alive. When no indictment was handed down to police officer Darren Wilson for the shooting and murder of Michael Brown, Mr. Mckesson grew his activism and that same year co-founded Campaign Zero, a project with the goal of collecting and publicizing police data and police practices to drive the understanding that highlighting this data-rich information is a way to reduce police violence. This research led to the #8can'twait. Focusing on the 100 largest cities in America, Mr. Mckesson outlines 8 violent tactics that police use to harm and kill a staggering and disproportionate number of Black and brown people. The Campaign Zero data also shows that if reforms were implemented against these 8 tactics immediately, there would be as much as a 72% drop in police killings. In his book, On the Other Side of Freedom, The Case for Hope, Mr. Mckesson writes, as gut-wrenching as it is to know the numbers, as infuriating as it is to read policies and contracts that enable brutality, I remain hopeful. I am hopeful because the choices that were made, the choices that resulted in our current state of affairs, are becoming clearer and clearer. The problem with the police isn't hidden. We can make a series of different choices. Will we? Mr. Mckesson attended Bowdoin College, and he graduated with a degree in government and legal studies. He is also honorary doctorate from the New School and the Maryland Institute College of Art. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Baltimore native and host of the award-winning podcast, Pod Save the People, Deray Mckesson.
Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here. I still live in Baltimore. I travel a lot. I split my time between Baltimore and New York, but I live in Mount Vernon. Baltimore will always be home. I used to teach 6th grade math in East New York, Brooklyn. I went back home, opened up an after school center on the west side of Baltimore. It still exists a decade later. I trained and supported a third of all the new teachers in the city and then worked in the Baltimore City public school system, most recently as the chief of human capital. But most of my work today focuses on police. And people ask me all the time, why do I focus on the police so much? What about the police? And what I tell them is to name all the ways that you get to prison or jail that don't include a police officer. That so much of the system of mass incarceration, so much of the criminal justice system, the police are actually the gatekeepers of it. So I want to talk to you today about what we learned since 2014, what we learned since Mike Brown was killed and then Freddie Gray was killed, what we learned since Sandra Bland was killed about sort of structures and systems. Now, I'll tell you that there are a couple things that I believe sort of as we begin. The first is that I think we can win in this lifetime, that this is not a 300-year challenge, this is not a 200-year challenge, that we can actually make amazing, incredible gains in this lifetime. I think we can end mass incarceration. I think that we can transition to understanding of safety that doesn't center policing. Like, I think we can actually do some big things in this moment. And the question is, like, how do we do it? So let me walk you through what we learned. So in 2014, we were trying to figure out, like, sort of what's the big idea. We think about these 2 big buckets. One is to reduce the power of the police. The second is to shrink the role of the police. Then when we think about reducing the power of the police, this is things like the use of force policies. That's #8can'twait. It's police union contracts. When we think about shrinking the role of the police, you've heard about defund or divest. You've heard about alternatives to policing like social workers. I probably should pull out this third bucket. The third bucket is around decarceration. But the reason why the police have so much power in people's lives is that we have actually made so many things crimes, right? So nationally, the FBI has reported for 20 years that only 5% of arrests that happen in the country are actually arrests for violent crime. That is a really small amount of arrests. That we look and we think about how we've staffed departments as if the arrests are like 50, 60%. We think about the most frequent calls, 20% of the calls for 911 nationally are mental health calls? Should we have somebody with a gun going to calls for suicide ideation? Should we have somebody with a gun going to car crashes or a host of other things? Probably not. But the decarceration bucket is fascinating. I'll talk about that a little bit, but would be happy to talk about it in the context. You know, Maryland is a state where felony theft is a felony over $1,000. In the state of Maryland, if you commit a felony over $1,000, you can get up to 10 years in prison. It's like, we probably should change that. $1,000 is a cell phone, is a computer. Like, should you get 10 years for stealing a cell phone? Like, that feels wrong, right? But that's a decarceration bucket. I think that it's a reminder too that the system of mass incarceration doesn't become mass on the big things. It becomes mass in the small things. It is things like the felony theft amount being $1,000. It's things like prison gerrymandering. It's the fact that we arrest more people for weed than all violent crimes combined, right? They're like, that's actually how the system grows. So let me talk you through what we learned. So the police actually have killed more people since 2014, not less. But when we look back and think about it, there's no year after 2014 that's less than 2014. A lot of people think it got better because you just didn't see it in the news, you didn't see it in other places, but it didn't get better actually. Like, it got worse. The other thing to remember is that the police actually kill more people in suburban communities than in rural and urban communities combined. People think it's a city problem because the city is where the media is most heavily focused. It's not only a city problem. There's actually been a 30% decrease in cities since 2013. Now, this doesn't mean that there's no problem in cities. There is a problem in cities. It's not down to zero. That means that people are still being killed. It is a reminder that unless we focus on the range of communities impacted, then we'll never win. The disparities around race exist in all three, but there are a lot of people that don't realize that suburban and rural communities, it is increasing. In urban communities, it's actually decreasing. So there are 3 big databases of police violence. Can you confirm that the slides are changing? Can somebody just tell me they are changing? Okay, yes. Okay, so there are 3 big databases of police violence. So let me talk to you about what the difference is in the 3. Now let me tell you 2 things about the data. There's no data before 2013, that we have no clue who was killed by the police before 2013 across the country. There's just no data. The second is, if you get killed today and a newspaper or media source doesn't write about you, then you don't exist in any of the data sets. Like, you don't exist. So those are the 2 limitations of all the data around policing. There are 3 big databases. Let me talk to you about the difference between the 3. We manage the most comprehensive one and the one in the middle, but I'll tell you what that means. So the Washington Post is probably the database that you know. The Washington Post only includes on-duty killings that include a gun. So that means that Eric Garner's not in their database because he was not killed with a gun. It means that George Floyd's not in their database. He was not killed with a gun. And it also means that Botham Jean, if you remember, Amber Geiger walked into his apartment in the middle of the night, killed him on the couch. Amber Geiger was off duty when she killed him, so he's not in the database. The other thing about the Washington Post is that they code you as armed if you had anything in your hand at the time of death. So that means that Tamir Rice is still coded as armed in their database. Fate Encounters is one of the biggest databases. The difference between them and the other 2 is that they include death by suicide as police involved. So there are a host of instances where people die in the presence of police for some reason, and we don't think that the police actively were involved in their death. So that's their big distinction. So for example, a guy, there's a warrant out for his arrest, officer gets to the house, he kills himself when he recognizes the police. That death is coded in Fatal Encounters. It's not coded in the other 2. Our database in the middle, Mapping Police Violence, is all on duty, off duty, all weapons, when an officer was actively involved in the death of another person. So this is just to show you that this is the Washington Post data. Remember, this is on duty killings that include a gun. And this is to show you that the black line is 2019, the orange line is 2020, that the police killed at the same rate and same number in March and April 2020 as they did in March and April 2019. No change. COVID, quarantine, lockdown actually changed nothing about the rate or number of people killed by the police. Now, I'll give you a second to look at this for a moment. So this is just to remind you that the violence of the police actually doesn't change in the winter, doesn't change in the summer, doesn't slow down in New Year's, doesn't change on New Year's or Valentine's Day or Christmas. It is constant. Now, you already know the stat on the left. Black people are more likely to be killed by the police than a white person. What you might not have known is that Black people are actually more likely to be unarmed than white people. It's a myth that Black people are just armed in the presence of police. That's just not true. Now, we'll talk about Oklahoma in a second, but if you look on the right, there are 8 cities in the country where a black person is more likely to be, a black man is more likely to be killed by a police officer than anyone is likely to be killed by anyone in that city. That's sort of wild. The most important thing to think about on this chart too is that these are cities that you've not heard of. You've not heard of Reno, you've not heard of Oklahoma City, you've not seen Anaheim, you've not seen St. Louis City. Like these are actually where the problem is most acute. We always remind people that the country is not LA and New York, that the country is not just the biggest cities, that the problem where the cities where the problem is most acute are often places you've never thought of. Just like this chart, on the left-hand side is the rates of police violence per 1 million, so we're accounting for population. So you look at St. Louis City, it makes sense so the protest started in St. Louis City in 2014, but you look at those other cities, these are not cities that you think of. In Phoenix, Arizona, 1 in 5 murders in Phoenix was committed by an officer. In Albuquerque, 1 in 3 murders a couple of years ago was committed by an officer. You know, like I know, if a gang was responsible for 1 in 3 murders, it would be like World War V. They'd be public enemy #1. When the police do it, though, it's like not even a conversation. So there's only one city. Our data set is heavily the 100 largest cities. That's because it took so long to get this data. We're slowly expanding. When we look at the 100 largest cities, there's literally one city out of the 100 largest cities that did not kill anybody from 2013 to today, and that's Irvine, California. On the right-hand side is just a visual representation of those who are unarmed when killed by police. It's a way to show you that people of color are more likely to be unarmed. I can show you the website so that you can find this stuff on your own as well. The other myth buster is that remember that this has nothing to do with crime. That what the police will say sometimes is like, you know, in places where there's more crime, there obviously is more violence by the police as well. That like, if there's crime, the police have to intervene. And if they intervene, the likelihood that they're involved in an altercation just increases. That's actually, the data doesn't show that at all. There's no relationship between violent crime and police violence. There's some places with a lot of violent crime, no police violence, and vice versa. The other thing is that you know this all too well, that there's no accountability. What you probably didn't know is that when we say charged or convicted, we mean of any crime. People look at this and they often think it's murder, but it really is any crime. Now, in 2015, we were like, okay, here are the 10 things we hear people talking about. These are things that we think are solutions. We think this is it, da, da, da. And what we realize is that, so I won't talk about 1, 2, 4, and 8 because they are sort of obvious to us. So broken windows policing is low-level arrest. We shouldn't do that. Community oversight, we think the community should oversee everything. For-profit policing is like civil asset forfeiture. We shouldn't extort people, fines and fees. Independently investigate and prosecute, that is, you know, we think there should be independence in general. Now, what we learned is that 5, 6, and 7 don't matter at all, and 3 and 10 matter a whole lot. So let me talk about 5, 6, and 7. I'm going to talk about them in 6, 7, 5, though. So with body cameras, the single biggest study of body cameras showed that body cameras have no impact on police behavior. They do have an impact on police attitudes. You know this, though, because in Atlanta, you saw Ray Shard get killed by a police officer, and it was in HD quality footage. It didn't change anything about how the officers behaved. The studies about body cameras actually just reach that same conclusion. Training, the 2 big trainings on implicit bias and mental health also have no impact on police behavior. They do change police attitudes. And then community representation. So the number of Black officers does matter, but it doesn't matter until the department is over 35% Black, then there's a decrease. There are only 12 police departments out of the top 100 that have over 30% Black officers. So like, while it might be a solution, it actually just isn't a scalable solution. And then community policing is one where there's no data to suggest that this changes police behavior. It does change police attitudes. We think community policing is racist in its core, that it's only Black people and poor people that we'd ever suggest that the more time that the police spend around them, the nicer they will treat them. So we're like, you know what? They should play basketball with Black kids so they can realize that they are human beings and shouldn't be manhandled and beaten. They need to take people's daughters out to get ice cream so they treat them like a whole person. Like, we would never offer that idea of safety in affluent or white communities. So now we have the only database of police union contracts and laws around policing. So there are 15 states that have a law enforcement officer bill of rights. Maryland is one of the 15 states. Maryland is actually the first state that ever had a law enforcement officer bill of rights. So there are these laws that just protect the police in incredible ways that they don't protect anybody else. What we say is that it's not that the police are above the law, it is that the police literally have their own set of laws. And we think that's a problem. So we're gonna be launching a campaign soon that is not necessarily the rest of this presentation about repealing all 15 of these laws, or at least taking out these clauses across these 6 buckets. So like in Maryland, for instance, when we look at the second column, restricts and delays, in Maryland, officers have 5 days after they are engaged in misconduct, killing somebody, a host of things, before they can be asked any question. The 5 days, so it's Louisiana that has 30 days, Maryland's at second worst at 5, and then there are a lot of places that have 2 days. When we trace the origin of where this delay comes from, it literally comes from a guy who came up with a theory that officers have the hardest job in America, and they need at least 2 sleep cycles where the adrenaline can drain from their system so their memory can be at its best. That is literally what he said. There is no study, not rooted in science, but that idea years ago changed so much. So we can talk more about this in the question and answer, but there are 15 states. Interestingly, Georgia, during the protests right now, passed a law that would be the 16th Bill of Rights. It just hasn't been signed yet by the governor. So who knew that that would happen in this moment, but it did. We also have the only database of police union contracts in the country. I want you to read this yourself. This is literally a copy and paste from a contract. So again, we track these. We publicly have 80 of them. We privately have 630 police union contracts. It is the single biggest database of police union contracts in the United States. Now, the way that I got to you all was through 8 Can't Wait. So we launched this. There's actually 4. So there are, the policing space is really interesting. Most people have data on crime. Most people are the criminologists. They study arrests, they study crime, they study jail data, they study prison data. There's a very small subset of research around policing. There's actually 40 years of research that shows that more restrictive use of force policies actually can save people's lives. These policies are not public. So until we demanded them, nobody had ever seen them in communities because they were hidden. So it took us a year to get the policies for the 100 largest cities. We bucketed them into these 8 buckets. So it's things like banning chokeholds and strangleholds. It's things like requiring a warning before shooting, comprehensive reporting. When we launched, only 2 of the 100 largest cities had all 8. There were a lot of gaps. I'll show you. So we think about banning chokeholds and strangleholds. People thought that this was a commonplace policy. It wasn't. Only 28 of the 100 largest cities banned chokeholds and strangleholds. So just so you know, there is a difference between the two. A chokehold is your Adam's apple, your airway. A stranglehold is the muscles around your neck. A stranglehold is also called a sleeper hold. It's also called a carotid restraint. There are a lot of cities that would ban one and not the other. That would create a loophole. So, you know, New York City is a great example. New York has historically banned chokeholds. Chokeholds are not banned today in New York City, but they were banned when Eric Garner was killed. But you know what wasn't banned? Strangleholds. So when they killed Garner, immediately they were like, we didn't choke him. We put him in a sleeper hold. So if you ever heard them say he died because he was obese or something like that, that was them using the idea that it was the restriction of his muscles that were exacerbated by his obesity. And that's how they use this loophole. So we are actually calling for a ban on both of them. Things like shooting at moving vehicles. Only 17 of the 100 largest cities restricted officers from shooting at moving vehicles unless they pose a deadly threat. So there are a lot of cities where the policy will literally say something like an officer can use deadly force if the person committed a felony with a deadly weapon. That's so broad. That means that you could rob a bank with a gun, drop the gun, drive away, and the policy would actually allow the police officer to kill you as you drive away, not posing a threat to anybody, not trying to kill anybody. And we struggle with those sort of policies. You can imagine, so what we're looking for here is, can an officer shoot you if the vehicle is the only use of force? Because here's the thing, is that if you shoot the driver, it doesn't make the car any less of a weapon, right? It actually makes it more of a weapon. So we sort of challenge departments on this. And then this is one too, you know, I'm not going through all 8, but this is one of the 3. One of the 8 is about requiring all uses of force. So in most cities, in 75 of the 100 largest cities, officers didn't have to report when they pointed their weapon at somebody. Now, if any of us on this call went outside and pointed a gun at somebody, that would be considered aggravated assault. That would be a violent crime and you would be arrested for sure. When the police point their guns at people, it's not even, we don't even know. The reason that we demand that this be reported is that in every city where we see it reported, it actually is the most common use of force. The police are pointing their guns at people at far greater rates than any of us had ever seen. So I'll stop there. You know, it's been interesting. I personally reviewed the Montgomery County policy, which I know somebody had asked about. Montgomery County doesn't have any of the 8. Councilman Jawando just passed that resolution around banning chokehold. So we saw that happen. And I know that I think it's going to be under review, but these are 8 policies that are common sense. They're just not commonplace. They've been adopted by police departments all over the country, which we are like frantically trying to track the progress because it's been so incredible. Most people don't realize that the Department of Justice only has the capacity to intervene in 3 police departments a year. A fully staffed DOJ can only do 3 police departments a year. We've already changed the policies in hundreds of cities. It will be the biggest restriction on police power in American history in this one fell swoop, which we're proud of. But it was only possible because people like you reached out. People were like, okay, I want to know my policy. I'm going to email my police commissioner or mayor. And what's cool about these policies is that mayors and police commissioners have almost unilateral power to just change them. It doesn't really require a vote. Doesn't require a hearing. They can actually just tighten up the rules. We know that this is the floor, not the ceiling, right? That this is not alone going to end police violence. That there's actually no one strategy to get us over the hump. So we stand in solidarity with people leading in the defund space, people leading in some other spaces. We are going to launch a project soon in the next week or so around police union contracts and these use of force laws, because I'll tell you, what we realize is that the structure doesn't change, the outcomes will change. That I lived through the process the first time, and you know what? In 2014, we got no structural wins. The police killed more people, not less, after 2014. Like, we just really didn't get any structural wins. And we looked at this moment like we just can't come out of this only getting symbolic wins. It's not enough to just elect new people. It's not enough to have Aunt Jemima not be in existence anymore. Like, we actually need to change the fabric of the laws and policies. And the reason, you know, some people will be like, shouldn't we elect new people? We absolutely should. DAs matter, mayors matter, that sort of stuff. But justice will never be dependent on good people. We need a system that works, whether the people are good or bad. So if you can go to jail for a decade over $300 worth of theft, that's just a bad system. It doesn't matter if the DA won't prosecute you. It doesn't matter if we got a good DA in this moment. We want a system that works whether or not the people are good or bad. I'll stop there. Excited for any pushes or challenges, excited to talk, excited for questions, because we'll only win if we do this together.
Thank you, Deray. Thank you. Incredible, incredible data. We have quite a few questions coming through for you. There's a lot of questions involving defund the police, but before we get to those, can I ask you this question is there any logical explanation for why Spokane or Reno have such high rate of police violence?
So we don't super know. Yeah, no, we don't like know why. You know, the Spokane is actually only the second city that we've ever seen the city council vote against the police union contract. They just did it like a week ago, so that's actually really promising. But don't really know why. You know, the Reno rules are pretty bad. Like, the Reno rules are very permissive. Like, Reno, I think, was 0 out of 8, actually. I think I just reviewed theirs. So you see a lot of cities where, like, the policy is literally like, you can just kill anybody if you think they did something wrong. You're like, that is a wild, like, that is just the wild, wild west. And there were a lot of places that were like that.
Okay, thank you. So talking about defund the police. So lots of questions surrounding that slogan and what that slogan really means.
Yeah, so that is not the strategy that we're leading on. But let me explain what I think it means. There is this understanding that, like, we overinvest in policing at the detriment of so many other things, right? So we don't fully fund public education, healthcare, a host of things. So if we divert that money from policing to other things, we believe that, like, the outcomes will just be much better, right? The people leading the defund strategy have actually clarified. Let me see if I can find. It is the people who lead the movement for Black Lives. Let me see if I can find. Let me show you what they recently released. They tried to release a statement to clarify defund. Okay, it's not letting, my computer is struggling. Okay, here it is, here it is. Here it is. So I'll give you a second to read this, but this is what the people leading that strategy, this is what they just put out.
Okay, thank you. And we can make that slide available also. Next question is regarding police cameras. Is it possible that cameras don't make a difference yet, but eventually will?
It's interesting. It's not, you know, some of the camera stuff that's really hard is that in most places, officers get access to the body camera footage before they write statements, or like it actually just doesn't become a tool of accountability for them. So imagine if you had a job that you knew that that it was almost impossible to be fired. That's sort of like what happens with police. You think about Maryland. In Maryland, when officers get disciplined, the panel that can discipline them is 3 police officers. I just don't think that's fair, right? I think that like somebody from community or a majority of community members should probably be the panel of people deciding on like discipline of officers, that it's your community, that the police occupy such a different role in society. They're the only people with the license to kill in the name of public safety, and that the public actually has an obligation to hold them accountable to make sure they wield that power correctly, not internal police officers, right? So like, I think body cameras could matter if there was accountability, but what we find is that there's like almost no accountability. You know, officers very rarely get fired. And, you know, in places like Minneapolis, 50% of the officers who get fired get rehired. So like, that doesn't matter, right? And then only it's really less than 1% ever get convicted of a crime. So they know that like worst case scenario, you get fired from one town, you just go to the next town, right? That like, so body cameras just don't necessarily work in the context where like there's no accountability.
Thank you. Can you tell us what communities have adopted the 8 Can't Wait platform and how did they get there?
I can tell you, so we are still like tracking it right now. I know that we're recording this, so if I show you, we just can't put this, you tell me. I can show you like the current tracker we're using so you can see it just because we're on Zoom and it is cool. But we just can't have that public yet. So can we pause for a second or no? Okay. Our launch that have moved. So it's cool. It's been like really fascinating to watch. And the important that, you know, we tell stories in 3 ways, right? We remind people that the problem is big, the problem is close to you, and you can do something about it.
Thank you. So here in Montgomery County, what do you believe are the most important pressure points? The county executive, county council, or the police chief?
So I think there are 2 things. One is I think that the police chief and county executive have the power to just change this policy. So you can go from 0 to 8 overnight if the 2 of them decide to do it. Like they have the power. They don't need a vote. Like they can actually just do it. In Maryland, so I saw somebody ask about the FOP. In Maryland, if we don't repeal the Officer Bill of Rights or at least take out these 6 set of clauses, it just won't matter. Like nothing, there won't be any more accountability for officers because it is such a roadblock. So that's really big. And then trickling down to the contracts at the local level. Like those, I think, are the biggest levers in the state of Maryland, in departments by Montgomery County. You know, we didn't do a project around reporting, but we'd love for more cities or the state to require reporting. I don't know if you saw a news article that came out a year ago, is that a part of what happened after Freddie Gray got killed is that they passed this comprehensive law around reporting in the state of Maryland. So departments have to submit their data. And when we look and tracked at the data, there's like only 2 departments, I think, out of 40 in the state of Maryland submitted anything. So there's just no willingness on the part of elected officials to hold departments accountable. It just isn't a thing.
Thank you. And since we're in that realm, what role does the FOP play in this process, and particularly in prosecution?
Yeah, so, you know, the prosecution question is interesting. Very few officers get prosecuted, right? Like it just isn't, they don't. It's like 99% don't, nothing happens to them. So when we think about this, we are looking for at least there to be an administrative process where officers get disciplined, they get terminated, they lose their pension. And what the FOP did that was smart from an organizing perspective, which is bad for community members, is if any of you have ever been a part of organizing, then you know that the hardest part of organizing or the hardest part of negotiations is money. That like somebody's at like either the management saying we don't have money, the union is asking for money, like across labor, money is like the thing. And the hard part about the money conversation with the police is that what they did that was smart for them is that there were years where like cities were just cash strapped. So they came to the table and said, you know what? We don't need no money. We aren't going to ask for raises. We're not going to ask for health insurance. We are going to ask for things like a 5-day waiting period. We're going to ask to destroy our disciplinary records after 2 years. We're going to ask for all these things that are cost neutral. And they did that across a set of years. That was like truly a nightmare for us, which is how we get these laws and policies and practices. So when I think about Maryland specifically, you can actually, I'll show you, you can actually go to the site yourself. So we make all of this public. It's called checkthepolice.org. But when you click on it, like you can click on Maryland and then a little box comes up that you can't see right now because it's a pop-up box. Let me show you the pop-up box. And it actually shows you the part of the law. It actually copies and pastes it so you can see it yourself. So for example, what this says, like the short version of this is that it disqualifies a complaint unless it's submitted by somebody involved, their family member, or somebody present. Now on the surface, this looks like a simple thing, right? But what this means is like, say for example, you are home, your neighbor, say your neighbor's like 13 or 14, runs up to you and is like, the police just did this thing, like, can you help me? You actually can't file a complaint because you weren't a witness, you are not their family member, and you were not involved. But say like you are the closest adult to them and you feel a responsibility to like tell somebody that the police did something wrong. We don't know why you couldn't file a complaint. If we told the police that they couldn't take anonymous tips to do their job, they would tell us it was impossible to do their job. We would say that like, why can't anybody who has knowledge of an incident, like why can't they file a complaint, right? This is actually just creating constrictions that like are unnecessary, but it gives the police a leg up. I don't know if you saw with the Gun Trace Task Force or part of the DOJ investigation, the Baltimore City Police Department, is that there used to be a process in Baltimore where you literally had to walk your complaint against a police officer into the police department, like into an actual building. What were the police doing? They were destroying them. They were not sending them down to the central office. That doesn't make any sense, right? So we want to remove these safeguards that like prevent the police. And here's the thing. We look at national complaint data. It's like 1 in 12 complaints against an officer get sustained. So people are not lying about the police. Nobody is filling out like a official complaint against a police officer and lying. Like that is not. So by the time somebody feels compelled to fill out a complaint, we at least think it should be honored and gone through the process and that we shouldn't create these unnecessary restrictions.
Thank you. I think we can fit in 2 more questions. First question is of the last. Do you believe that in hiring police officers that is better for them to live within the community versus outside of the community?
Yeah, I think the research on that is mixed. I think it can be helpful, but I go back to like, so I think it is helpful for a host of things, right? Like where are your tax dollars paying for other residents? Like I think there are a lot of cases where you can make the case for it. If the goal is no killings and more accountability, the data is not clear that actually matters, right? If the goal is that your tax dollars are not paying and subsidizing people who don't live in your community, like those sort of things, I think it does matter. But again, I'd say that like whether they are in the community or not, if they know that whatever they do, nothing can happen to them, like I don't think the outcomes will change. And I think that's where we are with the police. I saw somebody ask, do I support a national database of police misconduct? I do. Here's the thing about national things though, is that the police have very little-
Do you support a-
Yeah, I saw the question. There is very little, there's very little work that the federal government can do around criminal justice. Like almost all of the criminal justice stuff is local and state. So when we look at the pie chart, the federal government has about 200,000 people incarcerated. There are 2 million people in prisons and jails. So that means if we close every federal prison, that is just a dent in the system. Like the vast majority of people incarcerated are actually in local prisons and jails. So much of the criminal justice mass incarceration work is actually really hyper hyper-local. So when we think about a national database of police misconduct, it only matters if you force departments to comply and if there's a real penalty. Right now, we've never seen the DOJ actually enforce any of the penalties that they have made with police officers. So like, they don't even, there's a law that says they have to report the number of people killed, they don't. And the DOJ has never taken money back from them. So like, unless there's gonna be teeth, it doesn't matter. Somebody said coaching on how to approach mayors and governors and city councils. We'd love for you to get involved with us. We can keep reaching out, and like, please email me if you want to sort of form a team. It looks like you already are organizer, so we'll keep pushing out information and like would love to be partners. We're about to launch a thing about police unions. We do these calls before we launch where we explain the campaign to everybody. We'd love to do one with you all. We have an incredible set of partners all across the country sort of working on this. So like, there will need to be a team in Montgomery County, because, you know, in Maryland, what happens around criminal justice is that the legislators not from Baltimore make everything up. They're like, oh, that's a Baltimore issue. They're like, oh, that only applies to Baltimore. So we need people across the state to actually organize around these things. So it doesn't just become like, oh, that's a problem in Baltimore. Because the reality is, you know, I looked at Frederick's policy. Frederick doesn't have any of the aid either, right? Like, this is not a, you know, the policing issue is actually tough across the states. And then I think the biggest thing about coaching is like, for mayors and city council members is like, you'd be surprised, just ask or demand, and it matters. So few people ever reach out to elected officials that when you actually reach out in your own voice, it matters a ton. 5 emails, 10 emails, like written in your voice, gold. Like, that's why we don't send out, stock emails. We don't do phone, like, we want you to write that email in your voice, because if somebody gets like 10, 15 emails, like I mean, that's more than they ever get about anything. So like, don't discount your power. Like, you actually have a ton of power. And I'll say this is, when I was a government official inside the school system, I never got actual emails from teachers or anybody. Like, so when I would get 2 emails about the health insurance plan, I'm like, whew, this must be a big deal, because I never get emails. You know, like, people actually, you'd be shocked at how little people actually reach out. So like, that's a big deal. And we'd love to continue providing support or technical assistance, helping you read the law. You know, with the Maryland Officer Bill of Rights, is that we will need you calling your legislator. The Baltimore delegation will probably be fine about this, but it's the people in the counties. It's like, how do we make sure we get all the votes so that people like can do this?
Okay, and we've got more time here, and the questions are flowing in, so this is fantastic. Some questions regarding police training. What plans are there for the length of training? Other countries train for 3 years. The U.S. only trains for an average of 6 months. Is there any changes that we're working towards for that?
Yeah, so this just isn't one of the bets that we've made. The data is not clear that like increased training will fundamentally change the behavior of officers. Again, I go back to this idea that like, you can get trained in a million things, and if you know that when you violate the training, nothing will happen, then like, the solution actually isn't more training. The solution is accountability.
Agree with that. Thank you. Could you expand upon specific legislation that Maryland should adopt?
Yeah, so, you know, Maryland should repeal the Officer Bill of Rights. We should weaken the power of police unions to go to arbitration. So those sort of things are really big deals in Maryland. We should tighten up use of force across the country. So like, adopt something like 8 Can't Wait all across the state, for instance, like force police departments to do it. So those things would be really big in Maryland. Yeah, that's what I'll say. I saw somebody just wrote, what kind of backlash is your initiative experiencing, or do you anticipate how you handle? So, you know, one of the things that we got with 8 Can't Wait, there are a couple of things. Some people felt like it wasn't radical enough, right? That like, we should be demanding a different type of something, that the defund should be the only strategy, that we should be talking about abolition really clearly. And what we said to them is that, you know, most people have never ever seen these rules about when the officers can kill people in the neighborhoods, and we got to tighten up those rules. So like, the rules actually really matter, and these rules are not commonplace, but they should be. The second thing is that there's no one strategy to get to zero. That like, there will have to be a host of strategies to get us there. So I don't ever think about being in competition with the other strategies. We always think about complementing the other strategies. So that's how we think about it. And we know that 8 Can't Wait is like the floor, not the ceiling. The problem is nobody was at the floor, right? So this is one thing. We're going to do a different project around police unions. We are the only people to ever successfully organize against a police union. We worked with the Austin organizers to get the whole city council to unanimously vote against the police union contract. It wasn't in the middle of protest. It wasn't when it was hot in the news, and we did it and we got it done. So we want to expand that work all across the country, not just in big cities, but everywhere. So we believe that, right? And like, that's a part of our idea of change. I think there are a lot of people too, we believe that we can win in this lifetime, right? And when you believe that you can win in this lifetime, it does create a sense of urgency that makes it so we are always sort of moving the needle. So I want to do something on no-knock raids. I want to do felony theft amounts. We want to do this police union contract work. Like we are trying to make sure that we like push every single thing, because we believe in a theory of maximum pressure, that it's only if we like press and press and press that we'll get it. And I will tell you, I'm not a Pollyanna. I do think that we will end mass incarceration before I die, and we will fix the police before I die. Like, I believe it. I think it'll be hard. I think that we will be battle bruised. I think that it will be, we will come out and be like, woo! But I think that we will do it, And I think that, as a theory of change, we are never saying to you, blindly trust us. What we are saying is that there is a problem. The problem is close to you, and you can do something about it. And that we will give you all the tools and resources to do something about it. We will be here and we'll help you if you want it. I think about how I met you all. You send email. I'm busy, but I'm never too busy for community, because this is why we do the work we do. You wanted to read the policy. We read the policy together, because that, like, it'll only work if we had a conversation, but it'll only work if you know the policy like I know the policy. This is not secret. You should know the rules by which officers can kill people in community. That is like that's basic, right? So that's what we believe. And the more and more people that we like have a part of it, the more and more people, because here's what, I know I'm rambling, but here's what I think happens is that people see the issue, they're like, this is wrong, da-da-da. And then you're like, what do I do? And you don't know, like you don't know. So we want to fill in the space of like, not only do we think we know what you can do, but we want to show you that this is actually a problem in your neighborhood, and you can definitely do it.
Thank you. We got a question here. It's an interesting question. I know this person is a school teacher. Is there any plan to educate middle and high school students on these important topics? That's
a good push. We are currently thinking about like, I have a podcast called Pod Save the People, which is popular, and like that's been helpful for students. But we're thinking about different ways to like make this information accessible to them, because they're great organizers too. And like I'm telling you, one of the things that make It Can't Wait work is that so many people called their administrators, so many people emailed and pushed and prodded that it forced people to respond, and like it worked. There are some sheriff's departments who literally were like, they were on the record years ago being like, we will never ban the karate restraint. The karate restraint is a sleeper hold, and they banned it, right? They just did it. So like, and that was the power of people and communities actually making it happen. Places like Indianapolis went from 1 to 8. Reno went from 0 to 4. Like they moved.
Do you think there is a way to recruit for empathy, specifically police officers?
I think I'm just like as somebody who used to lead human capital, I'm sort of like over the recruitment. I sort of, I used to get the psyche veils for police officers. I think that's interesting. But again, I go back to like, it doesn't matter what you recruit for. If systems corrupt anything. If you know that you can do anything you want and there will literally be no consequence, it doesn't matter what you recruit for, that the culture actually sucks those people in.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. And is there any work to develop a database for all disciplined police officers so they can stop moving from force to force?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think it probably be more powerful at the state level. So the bill in Congress right now would require that hires are matched up against a database, but it wouldn't actually require states to do anything with that information. So say they find out that somebody got fired before, they could still hire them and like there'd be no penalty. I think states actually have more power here to like really press and fight.
Okay, thank you, Deray. Thank you. This has been fantastic. The engagement has been incredible. I want to, before I ask Diana to come back on, I also want to remind everyone that Deray Mckesson has written a book called On the Other Side of Freedom, The Case for Hope. I've read it. It not only spoke to my conscience, but to my soul and spirit. Politics and Prose has it for a 10% discount, I believe. You can acquire it there. And I'm going to turn this back over to, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I put my email address in, but that is just the easiest one, Deray.com. If you want to volunteer something, I'd love to be in partnership with the WDC moving forward. Let's figure out how to knock this out. Honored to be here.
I am, you know, I'm going to now bother you consistently. You're on the task. So now we'll welcome back our fearless leader, Diana Conway, president of WDC. And thank you again, Deray.
Okay. Am I unmuted? I am. Okay. So, wow. Thank you, Deray. Lisa had mentioned that you were, quote, a ball of energy, and I think she understated the case. Your presentation is so powerful. It's also deeply disturbing, of course. And as we did with Professor Angela Davis last week, we're going to snap up your offer before you think to retract it. I think we've got a good set of momentum here in Montgomery County with a highly engaged population that isn't always available in other jurisdictions. And the turnout today, what I loved about looking across everybody who was here is I know a lot of these names and they're effective advocates and activists, not always from this space, but also there were a whole lot of people here whose names I didn't know, which speaks to the power of you and your message. So thank you for bringing that to us today. I hope everybody who's listening to this will take a look at all the related resources that we've compiled on our website. I hope you will get Deray's book, hopefully from Politics and Prose. We maintain a good relationship with them. And of course, our independent bookstores need all the help they can get. And in addition to working on this issue, it has to go hand in hand with electing better people to lead us and make the change that we need. Specifically, I hope to see you guys on Tuesday, July 21st at noon to hear from Kristen Clark, who's the Executive Director for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. She came a couple of years ago after so-and-so's election and spoke about voter suppression in particular. There are some other Zoom rooms that we mentioned that are going to be available for all kinds of letter writing, phone banking, postcarding, and reaching out to voters in swing districts to get those state houses, the Congress, the Senate back into the blue column, and of course the White House. Electing clear-eyed Democrats is critical, but it is necessary, but it's not sufficient to get the changes that we're talking about today. So I think the next slide is the list of WDC committees. Yep. So today's today's moderator, Lisa Henderson, is the chair of that bottom right committee, Racial Equity and Public Safety. That's a brand new task force. I guess it's a committee now too. So we'd love to have your support for that, for the message that Deray is carrying and that we heard from Professor Davis last week and that we're going to hear, I'm sure, from Kristen Clark on the 21st. So get engaged, contact WDC if you need access to an on-ramp. Thank you again, Deray Mckesson, for a tremendous presentation, and Lisa for moderating it so skillfully. And thank you. Have a great day. Hope to see you on the 21st and in the trenches. Thanks, everyone.